Good evening. My name is Simon Guy, and I'm privileged to be the Dean of Arts and Social Sciences here at Lancaster University. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the Nuffield Theatre for the opening event of the Lancaster Words Festival. Our team at Lancaster Arts has worked closely with colleagues in the Department of English and Creative Writing to produce tonight's event, which promises to be an exciting celebration of all things literary. Our two performers really need no introduction, but briefly, PJ Harvey is well known to us as an internationally celebrated singer-songwriter who has released 9 critically acclaimed albums, been nominated for 7 Grammy Awards, and is the only artist to have been awarded the UK's prestigious Mercury Prize twice. Her current album, The Hope 6 Demolition Project, reached #1 in the UK album charts, and her first collection of poetry, The Hollow of the Hand, in collaboration with photographer Seamus Murphy, was published in 2015 by Bloomsbury. Paul Muldoon has published over 30 collections of poetry. He's the poetry editor of The New Yorker, the Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He's a former professor of poetry at the University of Oxford. He's currently professor at Princeton University, and of course, he's a visiting distinguished professor of poetry at Lancaster University. Together they will launch our festival words, and I ask you to welcome PJ Harvey and Paul Muldoon.
Well, thank you very much indeed. What a wonderful welcome. The last time I saw you, Polly Jean Harvey, was in an outfit called Brooklyn Steel. Mm-hmm. You were one of the first acts to appear there earlier in the year, a great new venue in New York City. I suppose there were 5,000 people there. What's it like to go out before 5,000 people? I know we have some sense of it this evening.
In some ways, going out in front of fewer people is much more nerve-wracking, I find. In fact, the most frightened I've ever been is probably playing Evershot Village Hall for my dad's 70th. And I was looking out at about 100 people, and every one of them had known me since I'd been born. And that's when I get most frightened. Actually, going out in front of larger crowds, like festival crowds, I find a lot easier, because in some ways it's more distancing because you're so far away from people. Being up close is more intimate, but also more, it keeps you on your toes, more unnerving, in a good way, I think.
So in the poetry business, which is the business in which you also are rather wonderfully now functioning, we're much more used to smaller crowds. In fact, this is a huge crowd for us. In fact, the publication of a book of poems, as a number of you will know, is often referred to as the calm before the calm. So tell us, is poetry something that has fired you right the way through your songwriting career?
No, it's a relatively new thing for me. I first became interested in poetry when I was beginning to work towards writing Let England Shake, which I think I started writing for that album in 2008. And because I knew I wanted to deal with the subject matter of war, it seemed like there would be so many pitfalls to try and enter into that as a lyric writer. How do you get the balance right? And I could hear where I thought the balance had been got wrong in so many other areas of, and by the balance I mean I didn't want to write songs that felt like they were going to be preaching or wagging your finger and telling people what to think or what not to think, or giving across a particular point of view. I needed to find a way to be impartial and paint a more oblique picture for people to make up their own minds. And I knew that I needed help as a lyricist. I needed to begin to understand more about words and how they work. And there just so happened to be a poetry seminar group run in Bridport in Dorset, where I was living at the time. And it was run by Greta Stoddart, a poet that we both know. And it was a once a month gathering, and you just bring in your poem and everyone would dissect it and discuss it. And I joined this group and slowly began to learn of the vast difference between poetry writing and lyric writing, of which I really had no idea quite how big the difference is. I thought going to a few poetry classes will help my lyric writing, but it didn't. It just opened up a new world, of an entirely different world, or I had to start all over again.
And that's one of the things we're going to be discussing tonight, are those two related, those worlds that are akin, but which also are quite separate. You know, I was struck, as I'm sure others have, by the influence, are we right in thinking that there's a Blakeian component to some of the songs on that fabulous album? Did you go back to Blake, for example?
I did, and I was mostly actually looking at the First World War poets when I was writing that album, but I was also looking at the soldiers' songs from the First World War. I had this very old hardback book of the songs that they had sung, and they were all very funny and very rude, and they were all like taking very well-known tunes but putting funny lyrics with them, but it was all really to boost their morale the whole time.
Right. Can you remember any of those lyrics at all?
Oh, I wish I brought the book with me.
Parlez-vous.
Yes, things like that.
I'm sure
Yeah,
actually
that's
we
one
should
of them.
lead you on
Yeah.
a little.
Yeah.
That's the Mademoiselle from Armentières, I believe.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Well, and then of course that heartbreaking song that's just called "We're Here Because We're Here."
Yes.
That's all it does. It for about 6 verses. We're here because we're here because we're here because we're here. To the tune of Old Lang Syne.
Right. And it's an indicator, if no other indicator were required, of actually how, in a strange way, how very sparse a lyric may be, which is one of the facts about a lyric which I think many people find surprising. We're taken aback actually by how short the lyrics of many songs are.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I've read a lot of Stephen Sondheim's writing. He's got that wonderful book out called Finishing the Hat.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know it, but it's about his experience of being a lyricist. But he talks quite a lot about the difference between poetry and lyric writing. And he uses a great example of an utterly brilliant lyric, which is, "Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day. I've got a wonderful feeling. Everything is going my way." You know, you can't get a better lyric than that. It's so simple, and yet it soars, and the melody soars with it because of its simplicity. And yes, I think song lyrics do have to be very simple.
Though paradoxically, Sondheim himself actually, and you might, do you have a Sondheim song that I seem to recall?
I do.
We've actually not prepared this.
No. In fact, that would be a good one to read, because I've chosen There's Something About a War from A Funny Thing Happened on Our Way to the Forum.
That's right, which is a song that was in... that's the show it was in.
Yes, yeah,
that's
A Funny
right.
Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum.
But in fact, I think it didn't actually get into the finished
Did it
show.
not? I didn't
have
know
a feeling
that.
it didn't, because I was checking it out today.
Well, this was one of the lyrics in the Finishing the Hat book, that when I was writing Let England Shake, I read this lyric and thought, that's amazing, and I used to keep it pinned up to look at it.
Would you mind terribly reading it
I'd love to.
to all of us this evening? Stephen Sondheim.
There's something about a war. 1, 2, 1, 2. We not only fought, but we won 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. Left, right, left, right. There's none of the enemy left. Right, right, left, right, left, left, right. There's something about a war. I don't know how to say it, but there's something about a war. Mere words cannot convey it. It's noisy and it's crowded, and you have to stand in line, but there's something about a war that's divine. You march until you're bleary, but there's something about a war The company is dreary, but there's something about a war. Your fingernails get broken, and the food is often vile, but there's something about a war makes you smile. The rain may rust your armor, your straps may be too tight, but decapitate a farmer and your heart feels light. There's something about a war makes the little world all right. Oh, it's tread, tread, tread through the mud, 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 and it shed, shed, shed all the blood, blood. Ugh! There's something about a war. Oh, it's plunge, plunge, plunge through the dust, 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 and it's lunge, 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 and it's thrust, thrust. Ugh! There's something about a war. You know it isn't massacres and laughter all day long. Still, there's something about a war that's like a song. A warrior's work is never done. He can never get a rest. There are always lands to be overrun and people to be oppressed. There's always a town to pillage, a city to be laid waste. There's always a little village entirely to be erased, and citadels to sack, of course, and temples to attack, of course, children to annihilate, priestesses to violate, houses to destroy, hey, women to enjoy, hey, statues to deface, hey, mothers to debase, hey, oh, I'm nearly there, virgins to assault, hey, halt, hey. Oh, it's hurry, hurry, hurry. But there's something about a war. It's worry after worry, but there's something about a war. It isn't all the drama and heroics it may seem, but there's something about a war that's a scream. There's never a time for reading, yet there's something about a war. The elephants keep breeding, but there's something about a war. You frequently feel lonely when the enemy has gone. Still, there's something about a war that goes on and on and on. You sulk when someone's suing for a temporary truce. Then another war starts brewing and soon breaks loose. There's something about a war, something about a war, something about a war. It isn't just the glory or the groaning or the gorier details that cause a warrior to smirk. It's the knowledge that he'll never be out of work.
Now, you mentioned having that pinned to your above your desk.
Yeah.
What would you have learned from that as you were approaching those songs? Or is this in fact a song that would have allowed you any particular openings? I mean, one of the things about it is it's highly ironized. And I mean, I wonder, I don't know enough about this, I'm sorry I don't, but I'd be fascinated to know why it was dropped from the show.
That. Yeah,
I mean,
I'd
it
like to
has
know
been, it's been collected on, you know, the little known Sondheim cuts, as it were. But it could be that, I just want to suggest to you, and I wonder if this would mean anything to you, is it possibly a little too smarty pants?
I wonder. I find it's quite risky as well. I mean, when they're going into the priestesses to violate, children to annihilate, farmers to be decapitated. I wonder if it was just a step too far.
You know, I mean, at that stage in his career, it may have been, this is after all the composer, writer who wrote a musical about the series of assassins of US presidents. So no subject is off limits, as it were. But
I think I kept it pinned up as well because of what you're saying about the irony, because how do you deal with such serious subject matter? And also, going back to what I was saying about the soldier songs, the way they dealt with it too was through dark humour.
That's right, one has to laugh.
Yeah,
yes,
and
quite.
so I was looking to see if that might help me find a way into it.
Right.
I mean, as it was, a lot of the Let England Shake lyrics, they weren't black humour, but
no.
They did tread the line of irony, and yeah.
I mean, I suppose it's an area, as you say, where one is concerned about seeming to be, almost using the material, for slightly, worrying reasons. It's a difficult area with which to engage. In some sense, the song that would be the real groundbreaker in the war song category would be the pro-war song. That would set people thinking. Mm-hmm. But we're probably not going to go down that road. Mm-hmm. So now, is there another poem, perhaps, that you'd like to read that is something that you hold close to your heart?
Yeah. Well, when I was thinking about the subject matter for tonight, discussing poetry and song lyrics, I immediately thought of Autobiography by Louie Mcneese, because I think it's a very song-like poem. I don't think that happens that often. I think, and something that we'll talk about more probably is refrain, but songs use a lot of refrain, the chorus, the refrain. Not so much in poetry, certainly now, but I think this is an example of refrain being used beautifully. And early on, when I first became interested in poetry, like I said, when I was looking to write Let England Shake, I was very drawn to this poem, probably because of the fact that I could almost sing it in my head.
As you were, just may I ask you about that, singing it in your head. Yeats, who was fascinated by this, the point at which the song lyric and the poem were indivisible, as they so often were in the Irish tradition, used a term of his own delivery of his song poems, which was chaunting or chanting, a version of chanting. As you were reading that Sondheim, is reading the word even as you were performing that, perhaps even singing to some extent?
Well, it's to be sung.
Uh-huh.
It's so obviously to be sung. You hear the rhythm all the way through. You can't really just read it without feeling that rhythm and pulse, I don't think.
It's instructing you almost to break into song, isn't
Yes.
it? Or at least to perform it in a certain way.
Yeah.
And that's something which I think is true of the more conventional lyric poem also. It is telling one how it needs to be in the world, in perhaps less obvious ways, because it's not so sing-along-ish, I suppose. Let's hear the Mcneese poem.
Autobiography. In the childhood, trees were green, and there was plenty to be seen. Come back early or never come. My father made the walls resound. He wore his collar the wrong way round. Come back early or never come. My mother wore a yellow dress. Gently, gently, gentleness. Come back early or never come. When I was 5, the black dreams came. Nothing after was quite the same. Come back early or never come. The dark was talking to the dead. The lamp was dark beside my bed. Come back early or never come. When I woke, they did not care. Nobody was there. Come back early or never come. When my silent terror cried, nobody replied. Come back early or never come. I got up, the chilly sun saw me walk away alone. Come back early or never come.
Now, one of the features of a conventional refrain, which of course, as you were suggesting, was a component of the lyric poem, for many centuries and indeed continues to be used, was that its meaning shifted ever so slightly as it went from stanza to stanza. And I mean, in this case, there's something quite troubling about the cumulative effect.
And like you say, is that depending on what's gone before it, what's been said in the stanza before, the meaning of come back early or never come feels quite different. It becomes more chilling as it goes through, I feel. But yeah, that's what fascinates me, that one line that's repeated over and over keeps changing the quality of its feeling.
The burden of it, in fact, burden, as you know, was a term that was used for the refrain. Yeats has a couple of poems that refer to 3 songs or 4 songs, 2 songs to the one burden. Now, may I ask you, as you sit down at your desk, are you conscious of being in the, if you sit at a desk, are you conscious of limbering up to write a song or write a poem, or
Yes.
what's going on there?
Yeah, I am now. Again, when I first started looking at words in depth, which was, like I said, only around the time of Let England Shake, I thought at that time that was actually the first time I ever sat at a desk and just worked at words. Prior to that, I'd only ever brought words together in tandem with the music. I'd work on them at exactly the same time. So it was quite a new thing to just sit there, and I knew I had to do it that way because of what I was saying earlier about to tackle the subject matter of war. I had to get the words right first, or everything was going to fall down because it was such a weighty topic. So that's why I wanted to make the words work on the page to begin with. And then I knew that whatever I added already had a good starting place.
So that's one theory about how to go about this most effectively. Of course, it varies from case to case. That's one theory. The first thing you mentioned is writing words and music simultaneously, as it were, is another. And then there's the third, which is espoused by some very successful songwriters. Paul Simon comes to mind, for example. He writes the music first on the principle that if the music isn't effective, if it doesn't grab you one way or the other, it actually doesn't matter about the words. Have you gone down that route at all?
Yeah, it didn't work for me. Yeah, when I concentrate on the music first, it's never worked for me. I've never been able to fit words in that seem to fall naturally. It always felt a bit forced, like I'd forced the words in. In fact, I mean, another interesting thing with Let England Shake was I wrote all the lyrics first, but then I sung them. I didn't play an instrument, I sang them, and I'd go for long walks, beating the rhythm with my feet, and I'd sing the words, and if I remembered the melody when I got home, it was a strong melody, and then I'd keep it.
So that was Wordsworth's method of walking up and down at the bottom of the garden, I believe. A tried and true method. Now let me ask you a question, and please, I hope I'm not presenting this indelicately, but were you using what used to be known perhaps, and perhaps still are, as lyrics that are not quite dummy lyrics, or lyrics that are not going to be there at the end of the day? The famous case, of course, being Scrambled Eggs, which became Yesterday.
Yeah.
Do you use that device at all?
For the early days, the first 3 albums was exactly that. I'd just make rhythmical noises and sing as I was playing, and then they would become words. So songs like Sheila in a Gig would have been until I found the right thing. Well,
that's also quite difficult, perhaps. I mean, it's not dissimilar from fitting words to music, but perhaps slightly easier if there's some vocalization that has already gone on.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, every way can work. I think it depends what you're interested in at the time, and I've become much more drawn to words and their meaning. I find it fascinating. And if you can marry the music and the words perfectly, that's such a satisfaction. It happens very rarely, I think, to get that beautiful balance between words and music when they're just supporting each other perfectly for that optimum.
Any other songs that you feel might fit that description from the canon?
From my canon.
Well, we'll come to some of your songs later,
Yeah.
perhaps, if you wouldn't mind. But just
Well,
from
actually, I did bring the "Let England Shake" lyric. Because that was one of the first.
Well, why don't we listen to that?
Yeah.
Because we've heard so much about "Let England Shake."
This was one of the first. I had to write a lot. I think I wrote about 30 songs towards this record, just in order to get the 10 or 11 that were on it. So many I had to throw away because they didn't get the balance right, because they ended up sounding like I was preaching or telling people what to think, or a bit too pompous, a bit self-righteous. And this was one that it surprised me, because it was one of the most complex song lyrics I've written in a way, and yet it still managed to sing.
Now, let me ask you a question about that. Is it possible that one could be slightly more preachy, as it were, in a song lyric than in a poem? I mean, there's that great line from Keats about how we steer away from poems that have palpable designs on us. But in a strange way, there's a long tradition. I mean, one thinks of the protest song, for example, of the song that very definitely has designs on us, and that's okay. So it is a delicate balance.
Do you think it's still okay? I mean, this is a question I ask myself a lot when I think about the peace movement of the 60s, and you had Dylan and you had Joan Baez and so many other great performers there performing at the rallies. Could that still happen now? I ask myself this, I mean, because I think now when I see a lot of political music, it leaves me cold, doesn't. And I wonder if it was just at that moment in time, everything aligned for it to be very powerful and feel a very potent force.
Well, I think it was.
I personally don't feel there's much of that successfully going on anymore.
Well, who knows? I mean, there may be. I mean, one would like to think, actually, that in our present era, that, songwriters, up-and-coming songwriters as well as established songwriters, might actually begin to write some protest songs. It's not as if we haven't plenty to protest. And, I think it sometimes takes a little while for that. I mean, but I understand, and that was part of what I was getting at with the pro-war song. In a strange way, that would be the news, the anti-peace song, if one is, that's the thing we're all meant to feel, the thing we're all meant to believe. And I suppose that artists tend not to go along with what they think people want them to think or say. And as I say, they're fearful of seeming to cash in on things. And that may be part of it too. But in any case, here we have
Let England Shake.
Let England Shake.
The West's asleep. Let England shake. Weighted down with silent dead. I fear our blood won't rise again. England's dancing days are done. Another day, Bobby, for you to come home and tell me indifference won. Smile, smile, Bobby, with your lovely mouth. Pack up your troubles. Let's head out to the fountain of death and splash about, swim back and forth and laugh out loud until the day is ending and the birds are silent in the branches and the insects are courting in the bushes and by the shores of lovely lakes, heavy stones are falling.
So a couple of allusions there, pack up your troubles, of course. Then you start with the West's asleep, and which I assume is a reference to the West's awake.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you, I hope you don't mind, a very personal question. As you were standing performing that, did you not feel how wonderful it would be to have the band?
No.
No. And yes, I mean, please forgive me. I don't want to be,
But no, I do feel. I mean, that is at its best with music.
Uh-huh.
And this again is like what we talk about, isn't it? It's very interesting. That's not a great poem. That's not a poem. That's a song that works. That's full, becomes full with its music with it.
What I find fascinating, and what I'm taking from what you're saying, is that your impulse now is to write the lyric where the pressure per square inch, to use a phrase I use perhaps overly much, on the words, is actually pretty high. So that, for example, when we read the collected poems of Leonard Cohen, we are coincidentally reading the collected songs of Leonard Cohen. Mm-hmm. Leonard Cohen would be a prime example of someone whose songs are going to withstand any kind of scrutiny or pressure that might be brought to bear on them. But that is not, however, a requirement. Mm-hmm. It's not a defining characteristic of the song lyric. In fact, if anything, a defining characteristic, from what I understand you to be saying, is that it could be, there's a sense that there's something left out of the lyric. And that lacuna, that gap, is what's filled in by the music. Mm-hmm. It becomes most itself when the band is behind you, as it were. Not to say that you can't present it here, of course you just have, but particularly we know what can happen, because we've all heard what happens with that particular song.
I mean, that song, reading the words off the page, it's actually quite sad, but the music that I put with it,
I wouldn't be too sad about it. I think it stands out.
When it's got the music with it, the music's like a strange dancey shuffle, and I sing it with a voice like a goat.
Yes. So is that what it was?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That had never occurred to me.
It's got a strange slant on it. In some ways, going back to something about a war, the black humour. Yeah. There's I put almost funny music with a very serious lyric.
But that's a fabulously catchy tune, isn't it? It's kind of contrapuntal, would one say? I mean, there's a tension between that.
The tune referenced Istanbul, not Constantinople. Boom, 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 Constantinople, but it's Istanbul. But it was the little tune in Let England Shake.
I've not realised that. There's a revelation here.
The tune is bum, 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 da-dum, dum, da-dum, dum, 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 da-dum, da-dum. And that's Istanbul, not Constantinople.
It's fabulous. Yeah. So, the poem can you imagine, would a defining characteristic of a poem be, by any chance, something that absolutely doesn't need music? Is that a way of thinking about it?
I think a poem has its own music in it already.
It brings its own score with it. Yeah. I mean, that certainly is the waggish idea about this, and I think there's a lot in it. The song lyric is missing something. The poem and the poet is desperate to achieve a kind of perfection with the lyric itself where there is no room for anything else at all. I mentioned Yeats earlier on. One of my favourite quotes from Yeats is that one may refute Hegel, but not a song of sixpence, right? Sing a song of sixpence.
A pocket full of rye.
Right? There is no argument against that. There's no argument against it. It is what it is. I think this, one way of thinking about the poem that's absolutely successful insofar as we can point to such a thing is that there is no refutation of it. And it's complete in some way, and it brings its own music and it brings its own score. It actually instructs one, perhaps, in how it wants to be read.
Yeah.
Though that's not always clear from the poetry reading, where there are cases where there's a style of reading which is imposed on the poem, which has absolutely nothing to do with the poem itself. Time for a poem or two, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
How about you?
How about me? I'm having such a good time talking to you. Really, I am. But maybe I'll read. Do you know what? I'll read a little. You know what? I'll read it's so much more interesting talking to you. I'll read a little. One of the things I'm fascinated by, of course, is the point at which the song lyric and the poem might coincide. I'll read a song, as it were, by one of my favourites, Warren Zevon. It's after 9 o'clock at night, isn't it? Well, he went down to dinner in his Sunday best. Excited. You know what?
Go. I think you should go over there.
Well, he went down to dinner in his Sunday best. Excitable boy, they all said. And he rubbed the pot roast all over his chest. Excitable boy, they all said. He's just an excitable boy. He took in the 4 a.m. show at the Clark. Excitable boy, they all said. And he bit the usherette's leg in the dark. Well, he's just an excitable boy. He took little Susie to the junior prom. Excitable boy, they all said. And he raped her and killed her when he took her home. Excitable boy, they all said. After 10 long years, they let him out of the home. Excitable boy, they all said. And he dug up her grave and made a cage of her bones. He's just an excitable boy.
That's great. That's wonderful.
Which, is a song which in some strange way, actually reminds me, as it happens, of the Mcneese poem. Mcneese, as you know, and as many in the room know, his autobiography is an early-ish poem. I can't remember exactly where it comes, early to middle. This middle stretch of life is bad for poets, as he said, writes somewhere. And he, of course, he didn't mention the earlier part and the later part, but his posthumous book, The Burning Perch, has been described as, by Edna Longley, the great critic of Mcneese, as the poems there are described as nightmare nursery rhymes. And there's something of that feel about that song lyric. And You know, when I began myself to think about trying to write song lyrics in my innocence, as it happens, I was lucky enough to be asked by Warren Zevon.
I was going to say, what made you start?
What
wanting to
made
write
me
lyrics?
start, and we'll not linger long over this, but what made me start was an invitation from Warren Zevon. And I'd written him a fan letter and saying what a great songwriter he was, and you know, how in the discussions of songwriting that cropped up and the names that were mentioned, his name was one I would always mention. And in any case, I expected no response from him, but he did get in touch, and we met up and had a chat around, a walk around New York, and he said to me casually, as it were, "Would you like to try and write a song with me?" And of course I was buzzing, and I casually responded, "Maybe we'll give it a go," or something along those lines. But in any case, so I'll read this song lyric that we wrote together.
When you say wrote together, did you sit down together, or did you things back and forth between you?
We did quite a lot of back and forth. Not quite as much, I suspect, as would be done nowadays, because for better or worse, the era which brings so many problems on the electronic front also brings great godsends and windfalls, in that sending material around is so much easier. As you know, it was still comparatively easy, but when we wrote this, which just after 9/11 actually, which explains an image or two in it, I wrote the first verse of it. He had a chorus for it, which he'd used at various venues. I think he started off when he was in a smallish venue, and an ambulance went by outside. And it was such a small venue that one could hear it inside. And he said, "My ride's here." So all we had to work on was the title of the song. So this is the first verse of it. "I was staying at the Marriott with Jesus and John Wayne. I was waiting for a chariot. They were waiting for a train. The sky was full of carrion. I'll take the mazuma." Mazuma's not a word one hears much in the song. Warren is the kind of songwriter who gave me and many others a lot of courage. One of his great coups, he thought, was that he had used the word brucellosis in a song. He was very proud of that. The sky was full of carrion. I don't recommend it. The sky was full of carrion. I'll take the mazuma, said Jesus to Marion. That's the 310 to Yuma. And this was before the remake, by the way. My ride's here. So I wrote that and sent it to him, and he sent back a CD with the rest of the music. We had written music to it, sent it back, plotted out, and then we spent weeks or maybe even months writing the rest of it. And that was to go back to what you were saying earlier on, that was a dreadfully hard lesson, because one imagines, largely because the lyrics of so many popular songs are kind of insubstantial. The terrible discovery that actually so much work truly has to go into this to make them work. Anyway, the Houston sky was changeless. We galloped through blue bonnets. I was wrestling with an angel. You were working on a sonnet. You said, I believe the seraphim will gather up my pinto and carry us away, Jim, across the San Jacinto. My ride's here. Of course, that's the moment when things get boring and when you need the little middle eight or bridge, which has a different feel. Shelley and Keats were out on the street, And even Lord Byron was leaving for Greece, while back at the Hilton, last but not least, Milton was holding his sides, saying, "You bravos had better get ready to fight, or we'll never get out of East Texas tonight. The trail is long and the river is wide, and my ride's here." And then back to the verse. "I was staying at the West and I was playing to a draw when in walked Charlton Heston with the tablets of the law. He said, 'It's still the greatest story.' I said, 'Man, I'd like to stay, but I'm bound for glory. I'm on my way. My ride's here.'" Thank you very much indeed. So, would you be good enough to read us perhaps one of your poems?
Yeah, I'll read something new, I think. So, I think when I started writing poetry, it really was still lyric writing, a lot of it. I think when I look at Hollow of the Hand, my first book, although it's getting there, I mean, a lot of those are really very simple and became songs anyway.
In most cultures, that's what people were doing. They were quote unquote merely writing lyrics. You know, that's okay.
Mm-hmm. So, I'll read something new. This is the new collection. Working title, The Forest, but it's set on a sheep farm and a haunted forest in the West Country. And this poem is called The Forest. Dirt on your face and twigs for tears. Your future was here, in the endless ash trees, searching for corpses to carry back to the den. Swollen badgers, the silk purses of squirrels and mice, their mouths inlaid with blue bottle eggs, the naked, newly hatched rooks, and an empire of maggots in a fawn's head. Here, in the violet half-light, you learnt the truth of the blade and the axe as you stood in the soft mulch by a car battery, a jerry can, the electric fence.
Now, supposing I were to come along to you, or a composer were to come along to you and say, Ms. Harvey, I'd really like to set your poem to music. As composers tend to do. And one of the things that composers really like is the shortish poem. Mm-hmm. What would you say to them?
I've never heard it done very well. Apart from, you've just made me think of a wonderful album by Joan Baez called Baptism. Do you know that album?
I don't know. What is it? Is that settings of poems?
It was an orchestral composer whose name I've forgotten, but he wrote musical settings for all sorts of different poems, Blake poems, but it was all about war, and it came out during the Vietnam War.
I haven't heard that.
It's wonderful, wonderful piece. So I think that can work. She's reading poems over music a lot of the time, but sometimes she sings.
That's a slightly different thing.
It
what
is.
I'm thinking of actually
Setting a party.
is what's known as the art song in some quarters.
I personally have never heard that done in a way that I've liked.
You know, Polly, I think we're both going to get into a lot of trouble here. I think are you ready?
Go on.
I don't think I've ever heard it done the way
No,
I
me
like
never.
either.
I was being gentle then.
Yes,
Never.
well,
in
we
fact,
can't. This is a family audience.
Times I've heard it done, it's nauseating.
Well, you know, but tell me why it is troubling to you.
I can almost get to what it is. It's hard to unravel it, but I think.
Well, let's try, because we've got we're among friends here.
Yeah. I think if you know that poem for what it is and love it for what it is, the music changes words profoundly. And if you've not got the right music for those words, it can change the words in a really bad way. And suddenly the poem seems pompous, self-righteous, poncy, in a way it never seemed before. It takes all the air away from it. And it takes all the mystery away from it.
You know, we certainly are not involved in trying, you know, in denigrating and downgrading an entire genre of music here, or are we? We, you know, I think one of the difficulties is, and please, we wouldn't want this to be taken amiss, but there is a terrible danger, which is very rarely overcome, that they all sound the same. They make everything sound the same. And anyway, I think we should probably move quickly along because, you know, I value my life. And in any case, but you describe, though, the voice, the poem spoken with the musical. I mean, I think I hope that in our rovings around here, our movings around, our hoverings around, that actually some of these ideas might come into a little bit of relief. Just by somewhere interstitially here, if nowhere else. But what do you make of the long tradition of the spoken word piece, the spoken word piece with music? You know, there's a long tradition. It was part of the beats, and who knows? I mean, perhaps. The Beowulf poet would have fallen into that category, and perhaps poets and many, the Homer poet may have fallen into that category, as it were. So there's a long tradition of it. Have you any thoughts about it?
Very little of that genre works well for me. I think of someone like Patti Smith, when she's performing and she might do one or two spoken word pieces in amongst her songs, I think that works really well. And I've seen her do solo shows that work brilliantly, where she'll read a poem, then she'll pick up a guitar and do a song, then she'll just read a poem. But when she's with her band, the band might be playing and she might recite or improvise over it. And I think she can do it, she does it well, but I don't think a lot of people do it well like she does.
I mean, in some sense, Leonard Cohen may have been doing it. Is that possible? Is that a
I
way
don't know.
of thinking about Leonard Cohen?
But do you mean because he sort of half spoke, half sung?
Partly because of that. That's partly what prompts that.
I don't know, I hadn't thought of it like that, because I'm a huge fan of his early work, where he really was singing then. It was only the later work where he stopped singing as much. I wonder if he became more interested in words, or if his voice didn't enable him to sing so much anymore. I don't know, because he seemed to drop a couple of octaves as he got older. I always preferred his singing, those early 2 or 3 albums, myself. I began because the words sung with a beautiful melody come alive if they're a song, if they were written as a song.
You know, I think we're probably moving towards the end of our time. A thought that saddens me. But what we will do, if you don't mind, maybe would be should we each read a little poem or lyric? Why don't I go first,
Go
and
on.
then we'll end with yourself. And so this is a little poem lyric. I'm not really sure what it is after all our conversation. Sadie and the Sadists. I joined Sadie and the Sadists in late 76. My hairstyle was part mohawk, part Elvis's cow's lick. It was so punk to get blind drunk on Guinness spiked with gin. Most dangerous those who'd pierced their nose with a safety pin. We came close to making it with our first LP. Sadie and the Sadists were like family to me. Family. Family. Sadie and the Sadists were like family to me. I joined Clive of India in early 78. It seemed frock coats and ruffles were never out of date. The life of Prague had me go the whole hog on the back of Pink Floyd's Pig. Our agent reckoned a song at least 20 minutes long could still be big. And we came close to making it with our third LP. Clive of India were like family to me. Family. Family. Yeah, Clive of India were like family to me. Psycho Billy and the Orange Men. I joined in 81. The bass I played was upright, a double-barreled shotgun. The bass drum, to boot, was built to suit by Loudons of Lambeg. Things are never dull when you have a skull tattooed on your middle leg. We came close to making it with our fifth LP. Psycho Billy and the Orange Men were like family to me. Family, family. Psycho Billy and the Orange Men were like family to me. Thank you.
Well, you choose. I could either read Down by the Water, which is an example of a very simple lyric which made a good song, or I could read A Fond Kiss by Robert Burns, which I think is utterly beautiful, beautiful song.
Well, I would like to make a special request, and I'm sure that I speak for everyone in the audience. We'd like you to do both, please.
Well, yeah, I think this is an example of a very simple lyric which made a great song, Down by the Water. I lost my heart under the bridge to that little girl who meant so much to me. And now I moan, and now I holler. She'll never know just what I found. That blue-eyed girl, she said no more. And that blue-eyed girl became blue-eyed whore. Down by the water, I took her hand. My lovely daughter, I won't see her again. Oh, help me, Jesus, get through the storm. I had to lose her to do her harm. I heard her holler. I heard her moan. My lovely daughter, I took her home. Little fish, big fish, swimming in the water. Come back here, man, give me my daughter. Little fish, big fish, swimming in the water. Come back here, man, give me my daughter. And I immediately wanted to read something by Robert Burns with the theme of tonight, because I think he is somebody that really understood the differences between songwriting and poetry writing, and did seem to get the balance just right a lot of the time. And his songs the language in his songs are often a lot simpler, and the words are more monosyllabic. This is such a beautiful song. It's called I Fond Kiss. I'll try and pronounce the Scottish right. Forgive me if I don't quite get it right. But I Fond Kiss. A fond kiss and then we sever. A farewell and then forever. Deep in heart-wrung tears I'll pledge thee. Warring sighs and groans I'll wage thee. Who shall say that fortune grieves him, while a star of hope she leaves him? Me, nay cheerful twinkle lights me, dark despair around benights me. I'll ne'er blame my partial fancy, nothing could resist my Nancy. But to see her was to love her, love but her, and love forever. Had we never loved say kindly, had we never loved say blindly, never met or never parted, we had ne'er been broken-hearted. Fare thee well, thou first and fairest, fare thee well, thou best and dearest. Thine be ilka joy and treasure, peace, enjoyment, love, and pleasure. A fond kiss, and then we sever. A farewell, alas, forever. Deep in heart-wrung tears I'll pledge thee. Warring sighs and groans I'll wage thee.
PJ Harvey, thank you so much for your nuanced, beautiful nuanced reading of these poems and songs by others and yourself. We're going to call it a night. I am going to be bold enough to suggest that one of the things we have been missing here is the opposite of nuance. And the opposite of nuance, if one hears Polly's fabulous band with its great cavalcade, I suppose, of drum. What's the collective noun for drummers? A boom, I don't know. A what?
A battery.
A battery. A battery of drummers. A battery of drummers. It's absolutely fantastic. But and it's not that there's not nuance, but there's this visceral thing. So we're going to leave you with the non-nuanced version of, or a non-nuanced version of Sadie and the Sadists. And we wish you a beautiful evening. We thank all of you who've come along tonight, and I hope we'll see you at some more events during the Lancaster Words Festival. To all of those who have put such effort into making this happen, thank you very much indeed. And we'll just you can leave, you can run out on this, which is going to be played at a horrible tilt. Thank you.